Well, ladies and gentlemen, another day in Retardistan and another day in South African politics. And I must be honest to say, I already made a video for today and I've had to push the video for tomorrow because the news today is just so retarded. Really just going to talk about it. But before we do, can I yet again remind you, if you haven't already, please subscribe to the channel. You know the drill, guys. Like, hit the bell icon, join the channel. And if you'd like to support the work I do here, you're welcome to buy me a coffee. Let's get on to the first news article, and this is a news article that appeared in the National Security News. Now, according to this news article, it has been verified on other secondary sources. A key point raised was that of the involvement of a Philip Fki, who serves as a key consultant and advisor to MTN. Now, he reportedly reports directly to the MTN chair, Mr. Jonas. If you don't know who he is, he was supposedly going to be the special economic envoy to, well, the US. And obviously, as you know, due to some inflammatory comments that he has said in the past, well, he was disqualified from that position, even though he's still in that job, but he hasn't done anything. Anyway, apparently he's been paid with invoices which suggest consultancy fees and expenses paid over numerous years in the hundreds of thousands of dollars. Now, these include payments to him through MTN Dubai, and MTN Dubai holds the Iran cell stake in MTN. Now, his relationship appears to have been, according to this article, established by Cyril Ramaphosa directly from his time when Cyril was the MTN chair. Apparently, he introduced him to the then CEO and facilitated MTN's controversial partnership with Iran's Ministry of Defense for MTN Iran Cell. So this is the actual direct link between Ramaphosa and Iran. Now, Fki orchestrated forms of lobbying effects in the United States, including the hiring of a group as MTN's lobbying firm. He monitors and reports to South African political delegations visiting Washington, D.C., such as those from Solidarity, AfriForum, and the DA, and he briefs MTN's leadership on their arrivals, positions, and their discourse. So it's very curious that he himself monitors and reports to the South African government on movements from unofficial bodies like AfriForum, the DA, and so forth. Now, that role specifically, if you think about it, is basically a spy. So he's effectively spying on South African political delegations in the United States and reports back to them in South Africa, his key partners, whoever you want to call those. Now, it's interesting that he briefs MTN's leadership on these parties' arrivals, which implies that MTN is then leaking that information back to the presidency, showing that the presidency still has a very influential role, or at least the ANC and its members have a very influential role in MTN itself. Now, all of this became apparent after a whistleblower raised concerns about, well, Fki's dual role, his straddling of corporate lobbying, his political intelligence, and his internal advisory functions. Now, the reason for this is because this has implications underneath the U.S. Foreign Agencies Registration Act and forms of transparency regulations, as well as the ethics and governance in South Africa. So effectively, he needs to register himself as a spy, and you may say it's unethical for a corporate to spy on these other entities like Solidarity and AfriForum and opposition political parties in Washington, D.C. on behalf of the South African government. That's not what they should be doing, specifically through a corporate like MTN. But inevitably, his activities do exemplify how corporate interests, specifically large corporates like MTN, and how they can intersect with political movements and influence forms of foreign operations. Now, this blurring of the line between corporate consultancy and political strategy has raised flags for both regulatory scrutiny and a form of public trust, and many individuals are saying, is this the guy who's responsible for facilitating the illicit funds between Iran and the ANC? And I don't know the answer to that. It's a question that people are asking, and it's, well, at this point in time, a worthwhile question to ask. Now, talking of the US, we can't talk about the US without talking about the trade tariffs, because as you know, South Africa has been hit with the 30% US trade tariffs on its exports, and this is putting pressure on domestic companies, well, because of this whole tariff palaver. Now, as you will know, the government in response launched a Plan B strategy, and their Plan B was to seek to expand trade relationships with the EU and China to compensate for the loss of the US markets. Now, news has now come out that there is a problem with this Plan B, and the problem isn't just about shifting exports. As you know, the EU and the Chinese markets aren't really an easy substitute for the US, and this is really due to differing demands, regulatory environments, and competitive pressures. With the EU now turning out to be, well, a saturated market, many individuals have tried to sell to the EU, and so it's actually not that easy to get into the EU to sell because, well, the competition is rather hard. What exactly this is showing is that ultimately this Plan B, which the ANC was so interested in relying on to diversify away from its US dependency, whilst maybe was logical, executing it is not proving as easy as they thought. In fact, it's proving highly challenging, which again shows you that the ANC's short-term strategy on stuff is, well, rather telling, because none of these plans that they seem to have any form of, shall we say, long-term thinking involved. Now, you may say, with all of that going on and the need to continue to engage with the United States, that the ANC would keep its nose clean. It would effectively try to do its damnedest best to put its best foot forward with the United States in order to secure a trade deal. But you know, whenever you think that, Cyril's like, hold my beer. Because in other news, the South African National Defence Force, the SANDF, will conduct its third ever joint naval exercises with Russia and China in November 2025. Now, amazingly, this is all being intentionally aligned with the G20 summit, which South Africa will be hosting. And I must say this seems really stupid because a large number of the G20 are not exactly currently friends with Russia. So why you would conduct a naval exercise with a potential enemy of G20 countries whilst you host the G20 just doesn't really seem to be logical to me. And hey, I'm not responsible for international relations, so what the hell do I know, eh? But the summit itself is a highly diplomatic event, and it has a very high diplomatic visibility. And the timing itself is really noticeable because it will raise both geopolitical and symbolic significance, and this is not going to be lost on the people that attend. We already know that the US is not really keen to attend, and with this going on, well, I really see them not wanting to be involved at all. Now, you've got to look at the history around this. The first event took place in November 2019, and the second event took place in March 2023, and this was off the coast of Durban near Richards Bay, and you may recall that made the news. Now, this current new one will continue that pattern of this tri-military cooperation underneath the BRICS framework. Although we say the BRICS framework, even though this is actually only involving Russia, China, and South Africa. So it doesn't involve Brazil and India. And there are now new BRICS parties, so one has to look at it and say, well, what about them? Well, they're not actually involved. Now, the exercise will occur in the Western Cape waters, with South Africa acting as the host nation, but the actual participant, the lead participant, will be China. So China will actually be leading the exercises. Now, according to Defense Web and the Department of Defense, well, the aim of this is to deepen strategic relationships amongst the three participating nations, enhance maritime cooperation, shared tactics, and interoperability, and promote maritime peace and stability in the region. Now, I can't really see that actually taking place. A planning conference took place to plan this entire thing in June 2025 in Simonstown. Now, you may remember that Simonstown was actually the site where we had the Lady R incident. Why this all becomes very interesting is because if you watch the channel and you read the news, you will notice that very recently the US had to pull out of a planned military exercise with South Africa over South Africa's quick, sudden departure from the agreement, where they denied the Americans the ability to bring in their weapons into South Africa and train with their weapons. And that was done all at the very last moment, and even Trump's administration looked at this and thought, well, it was highly provocative. So now one has to look at this entire supposed exercise and say, well, to be frank, it's really, really stupid. Like, why would you do this? Why would you risk annoying the Americans with something like this? But it's not just the Americans that you risk annoying. There are other nations, France, England, and so forth, that don't have good relations with Russia. Why would you conduct a naval exercise with these guys' enemies during the event that you're due to host their key leaders? This is dumb. This is like really dumb. And again, highlights exactly just how stupid our government is. Now, if you really wanted to look how stupid our government is, look no further than the 29th of August, when Ramaphosa went to Zimbabwe. Now, during a Zimbabwean agricultural show in Harare, Sir Ramaphosa praised Zimbabwe's land reform, describing it as essential, and commending the efforts to revitalizing the agricultural sector through policy reform, irrigation and mechanizations, and both large and small-scale farmer empowerment. Now, one has to look at this and say, well, what exactly were you praising, Cyril? Was it the compulsory confiscation of land from white individuals? Because as you will know, land reform has been highly contentious since the early 2000s. The government seized nearly all white-owned farms, often without compensation, and this caused significant declines in agricultural output and an economic contraction that the country's never recovered from. As you'll know, by 2013, the program had effectively dismantled all white commercial farming. While some compensation agreements had been reached, the reforms remain a flashpoint due to results in food insecurity and foreign exchange crises. Now, in response, the Democratic Alliance responded sharply and rejected and condemned Ramaphosa's remarks. And I must say, the DA are still in the GNU working with Ramaphosa. So this is kind of like, it's a little bit, bullshit from my opinion. Now, the DA called Zimbabwe's fast-track land reform a disaster that decimated the economy, diplomatic ties, and triggered famine and setback. And this is factually correct. The DA expressed concern about South Africa's possibility of adopting similar expropriation strategies and raised alarms around economic and social consequences. Now, it's important to recognize that the ANC is still deeply wedded to the idea of EWC, expropriation without compensation. We hear a lot about the so-called suggestion of land reform, and let's be honest, the only thing that the ANC are actually able to reform is your bank account into their bank account. So let's be honest, the idea that at some point in time that they could resort to this as a form of desperation to keep themselves in power, it's not exactly beyond the realms of possibilities, right? I mean, I don't actually think it will happen. South Africa is noticeably different from Zimbabwe, but there are noticeable similarities as well. Now, Ramaphosa's praise is noticeable because it risks legitimizing a model that for many critics produced humanitarian and economic fallout. And ultimately, that's why individuals were sparked and said that this was alarming, because it almost adds a degree of legitimization to, EWC, and we really don't want to be doing that. Although when it comes through to Ramaphosa, he's the most radical president we've ever had, so who knows? Now, moving then on to a last news article of today, and this is a leaked recording which has surfaced around a Stellenbosch municipal HR manager who apparently called on the municipalities to stop hiring white people. He even cited that there are vital technical positions that should be filled by non-white candidates, even if it means using illicit methods. Now, it's very interesting to note that Stellenbosch's demographics show that whites make up around 18.5% of municipal populations, with Afrikaners being the dominant language and a large mixed-colored majority. Now, ultimately, you need to look at the remarks given the context, and that is, currently, as of the 1st of September, the Employment Equity Amendment Act is now in place, which does require many of these municipality government structures and corporate structures to put, forms of quota employment in place. And so one could ask the question of whether or not he was suggesting that ultimately what he was attempting to do is to reach the relevant quotas. Now, these quotas, we were assured by the government, was not going to be used in order to fire white people and give their jobs elsewhere. We were assured that they would be done in a logical manner and that they were only targets, they weren't actual set criteria. But in typical fashion, the government lies, because we all knew that the targets were not targets, especially when they carry a sanction, a criminal sanction for not meeting them and possibility of fines. So we all knew that they would be used in a nefarious way. And it's telling that the nefarious way took a whole 24 hours to suddenly emerge on social media, with one party now using it in what seems to be a very racist manner, in order to fire white people. Now, you could say that actually the largest population in Stellenbosch is a large coloured majority, and so they should be the ones reflecting the jobs. But the idea that you must make it difficult or you must stop hiring white candidates completely, even through illicit methods, will be alarming, because this is exactly what people have been warning about for some time. But in any case, it's also telling that this was in Stellenbosch, of all places. Well, ladies and gentlemen, that's the news for today. Our government remains retarded, and it is very interesting to see that the dots connecting MTN to the ANC continue to, well, become more transparent. And I suspect that this is going to continue for some time. The ANC continues to deny that it has any link to Iran, but the evidence at this point in time is starting to prove damning.
I said recently in America that we as Muslims, we are a peace-loving people, but we are permitted to engage in jihad when necessary.
Anyway, these are my views. Do let me know what you think in the comment section below. Until tomorrow, bye.